and welcome to Cujo Sound. Bjørn Jacobsen speaking here, and I'd like to create some new game audio talk videos. As I've found some quite similar games, surely they are not the same, but the main setting definitely is. I'm talking about Stranded Deep, Subnautica, and The Forest. Before I even get started here, I'd like to bring the usual disclaimer. These videos will contain spoilers. They are not made to mock the developer, not to make any kind of disrespect, not meant to find bugs and point fingers. No, these videos are made simply to discuss audio design in the game, the implementations, the issues that we experience, and if I purposely find an issue and force it to happen again and again, then it's for a reason and proof of concept of what we're talking about, and not just to prove that there's a bug here and point fingers. This is to try and figure out why issues occur. Why does it sound the way it does? Why does it behave the way it does? And how could implementation to this be done? How could it be done differently? Or how could we have solved this issue? And how do I think the actual developer did this? And so on. Also, all three games in this series are made by seriously small developer teams, and all three games have, compared to their team sizes, massive scopes. So the fact that these games are even playable is technically rather impressive. Let's start. All three games are made in Unity. I do believe that both Subnautica and Stranded Deep use the native audio engine in Unity, and The Forest is using Fmod, but I can't be sure. Not to be confused with the fact that the audio engine in Unity under the hood is actually Fmod to begin with. I'll go over the games one at a time, discuss them, and analyze it like I normally would in these game audio talk videos, and then move over to a fourth video where we will discuss all the three games in comparison. The three games mark themselves as similar because of their survival setting. Survival is the core game design, and one is on a deserted island without much combat, another is survival underwater on a distant planet in space, and the last one is on an island with a forest and some not-so-friendly natives who are not super happy about your appearance, suddenly disturbing their peace. Let's start by talking about Stranded Deep. This game starts with an oddly similar to The Forest intro cinematic. Zeitgeist, I guess. The game is from 2015 and The Forest is from 14, so it's probably just the same idea, spawning in different places. First, I gotta say that normally when I do these videos, I really aim to be positive about what is going on in the game that I'm talking about, but I really had some issues in some of these games that I really think are worth addressing. Stranded Deep actually got me thinking when I was playing it that the sound design could have used a little more variation right off the bat, but also seems like that the setup and implementation as well as the sounds in this game are not made by a sound designer or a team that is used to critically listen or even make games of this size. Could also be a time issue, but I don't know. Could also be that the sound designers have just been creating these sounds and given them to a developer who has then implemented it for them, meaning that some sort of aesthetic, sound design, technical creative idea might have been lost in translation. But again, I would really like to acknowledge that this team who made this game is really small, and the two main developers, Ben and Sam, have done an incredible amount of work to even make this game remotely possible. Stranded Deep is also a brilliant example of why it's really important to have randomization and variation on sounds and an implementation. In the intro cinematic, we have a plane that crashes. In a linear fashion for this, we don't necessarily need variation and randomization on sounds, as we are not part of the game world yet. But once we crash, the sound of our head hitting the seat in front of us just has this tiny little generic thump. Sure, this is an audio direction comment there and not really a technical one, but why isn't this a massive smack in the face that knocks you out? Sure, taste is taste, and this is just my opinion, but one of the reasons I'm pointing this out in Stranded Deep already is that I will also be making directional comments about what's going on in Subnautica and The Forest, because there's a lot of those questions being raised. More on that later. So after this odd straight out of a sample library head hit, we are underwater and need to swim up. This is followed by an apparent underwater loop, which isn't looped correctly. The sound of the crash itself in the start of the file seems to be part of the loop, so if we swim around here instead of going straight to the lifeboat, notice how it plays the crash sound again and again before we surface above the water here. You can even hear the looping sound and the crash sound when you're above the water. This, of course, led me to try this out and purposely stay underwater longer than intended, and this is what happens. How this passed QA, I don't know, unless a QA person simply swam directly from their seat to the lifeboat straight away so that the loop would fit in time, maybe. But how this would pass if you stayed underwater for longer, I don't know. This could be because the sound has been provided by the sound team and then a programmer has added it to the scene, hitting the loop button toggle in Unity and just leave it there because the sound needs to play and it needs to be a loop, but not knowing anything about how loop sound should be made. So this isn't necessarily an audio team problem. Enough of that cinematic, let's move on here. So the game starts, the sound of water clucking and this general atmo of the game is pretty nice. The whole point of feeling like you are on a deserted island alone, nothing else is there but wind and just water sounds, that works okay. So here in the beginning of the game, I'm just sailing around. I'm noticing that the paddle sound here seems to be either the same or quite similar, regardless of how many strokes I take in the water. It doesn't matter what kind of speed and power I add to the vessel, it's just always the same. Like here. I'm stuck and I'm not moving, yet the sound stays the same. Some sort of speed or water splash detection system would have been really nice here. But already during my first moments of walking around here on the island, I do notice that the music is nice to listen to. The music is really nice, by the way. But also, the footsteps here in the sand seem to have the same 4 to 5 variation, and they seemingly play in a sequence, so they definitely form a pattern. Also, when running in water, there's definitely a pattern. Surely, if we switch between surface materials, you don't notice it as bad because you switch so fast. But when running around here and you step on sand for longer periods of time, it's definitely in need of some variation here, at least some randomization between the steps. Actually, often you're better off with just 2 variations than 3 or more, usually because if you have 2 quite similar sounds, then you can just randomize the pitch and other things, and none of the steps will stand out, really. But add a 3rd one, and especially if that stands out and plays in a sequence, you will suddenly have a pattern that is totally recognizable. One thing that does come to mind here as to why this may happen in a setup like this, because this happens in Subnautica as well, that walking around isn't really the prime focus here, as many other sounds in the game are pretty good. My guess is that in this case, they really thought that you would change surface material more often or be more on water, and therefore steps are not important. But in Subnautica, it's just too few variations and an irritating click noise that keeps repeating. The same goes for the pickup sound, opening the backpack using items from the backpack and so on. Either only one sound or pointless several variations of the sonically same sound. And this is definitely a bug here. It happened numerous times while I was playing. The front and back speakers would start to phase each other out, as well as clicks occur in the sound. Now this is quite typical a Unity bug, as I've noticed it in many of the projects that I've worked on myself. It seems like the audio engine simply loads too much at a time and can't handle the stress on it. And since this game was out before Unity 5, then there's no access to the in-game mixer or anything like that. And the problem that I remember having was also pre-Unity 5 versions, which was released in 2017. Stranded Deep is kind of procedural, or at least the more procedural of the 3 games in the series, as it generates the islands that you're on, and you can even generate them yourself, giving the various islands and levels, so to speak, a difficulty setup. So all surface materials and so on are definitely an automated setup because you can't mark them out. It is also clear that when you sail around from island to island, a slight lag occurs as you approach a new place, so it clearly loads what is needed in chunks. Hopefully this means that it knows which sound will be on this island and loads them into the memory and not just clocking the memory with all the sounds at one time. As I mentioned, the backpack can also have some quite repetitive sounds here, like hitting this tree, picking up the sticks, and opening the backpack. Seems like it's the same sound over and over again every time an action is taken. The game, though, offers several sounds that fit the environment well, and it also provides informant sounds, like here on the fireplace when cooking, you get a timer sound, which sounds like a strangely modern kitchen thingamabob that clicks whenever the food is ready. But nonetheless, that sound plays regardless of where the fireplace is, so you can start cooking and then take off on your boat, and then you can hear this sound miles away. The game does provide an important informant to your gameplay, and that is your wristwatch here that keeps beeping whenever you need anything, which kind of keeps you up to date with what you need to survive. Especially in the beginning of the game, it's pretty important. There's lots of weather effects. The wind sounds are a little harsh compared to the fact that you may be out in the ocean and no trees, and all you hear is howling in trees. And one thing that I noticed is that the sound of thunder hits at the same time as the actual lightning, which means that the lightning strike would be pretty close and either totally deafening or should kill you. So no delay on the actual thunder. I do think that the weather must be triggered somehow, as you, in a procedural setup like this, or prearranged island system as such, have a marked area with information. So a way of doing this very well would be simply to have a code trigger on if raining, and somehow determine how much it is raining and let that value control the sound of the rain. Most likely also the way it's dealt with in The Forest, yet in a totally different context. But also how I'm actually doing it in a game that I'm working on right now. But notice here that the weather takes into account what global weather you have. So if it's raining, you hear rain. It doesn't matter if you're under a shelter or somewhere else you found under a tree or anything like that. Rain sounds like rain. And wind is wind. So even if it does feed it parameters, there's not much variation going on here. Swimming is also quite the thing in Stranded Deep. The underwater sound is actually good, and the sound of the movement underwater is well represented, which is actually different from the 2 other games where your actions underwater can seem a little bit missing, or whenever you make a move it's a little different. But more of that into their respective videos. On the other hand, the water splash when coming out of the water is seemingly always of the same size, regardless of what speed I come out of the water with. And that's a shame, as I find it ruining the immersion of me casually jumping out of the water Baywatch style, coming onto the beach like a total pro. Stranded Deep is quite difficult to play, actually. It has some nice survival stuff going on, and for the majority of the game you are not ridiculously overpowered, and you don't meet any ridiculously overpowered monster or similar things to ruin the realism. I quite like it. Even though the sound design has some issues here and there, both technically and aesthetically, it's definitely a game that I had fun with playing, and when sailing around in my raft, you do really get some nice sounds going on. Alright, so Stranded Deep has some good ideas going on, but somehow manages to become a repetitive mess. Without knowing how this all happened, I'm wondering if the sound design team just delivered the content as I mentioned, and someone of the dev team just simply did the implementation so that there was no quality proof. It could also be a lack of time, could be miscommunication, but certainly something happened here that made it difficult to really finish this off. The bosses in the game do have custom sound design, and they do sound alright. I'm not going to spoil them or anything, but something tells me that a certain number of things was in focus for this game, so to make these bosses sound great, but no focus on footsteps. So some sounds are important and others are not, and some are not even properly tested. But all in all, this is a fine survival game. If it wasn't because I had the ending of the game spoiled because I was watching a review of some other game, and in the same video spoiling the ending to The Forest as well, so that review guy deserves some medal. Anyway, thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you again in the next video about Subnautica and how some solutions that they have are working quite well, yet the game also suffers from a number of small dev team issues. And funny enough, I found out that saying anything negative about Subnautica really gets people's blood boiling, so if you're that type of person, I suggest you watch that video. If you like this video, please hit the thumbs up, or maybe even subscribe to the channel if you want to know more about game audio, setups, aesthetics, theories, ideas, plans, whatever. If you want to support this channel, the time it takes for me to create all this content, then consider heading over to patreon.com/Cujo Sound, where you for as little as $1 a month can help me sustain this channel, keep it alive, and you can even subscribe to some higher tiers and you will be able to get help with your projects, get access to our Discord channel, and other things. This is Bjørn Jacobsen, signing out, and hopefully I'll see you in another video here. Cheerio.